actually started selling marijuana and cocaine in my community, and that went on for quite a few years. Our relationship changed a little bit where, there were a lot of drunken arguments, physical and verbal abuse. We tried to live the life of a couple that had it all together and, had three great kids and all that. So it was a little bit of a more of a poser type. I looked like I had it all together on the outside, but I was actually dying on the inside. Well, I knew I had big problems, but I wasn't ready to admit it to anyone. I was physically, emotionally, and financially spent. My coworkers were starting to begin to notice my behavior and absences at work, and my marriage was falling apart. I was close to losing my job without a college education. I knew I couldn't lose this job. And, I really started getting sick and tired of being sick and tired and started often, thinking about taking my life. I would get out of my car in the morning to go to work in the garage and sit there and just wonder, hungover and wondering, what's going on? What something needs to change.
Have you ever made a New Year's resolution at the beginning of a new year just to go back to doing the same old things that you've always done? Do you ever get sick and tired of being sick and tired? Are there things in your life that you have tried to change, but it just seems impossible? Maybe these things have been in your life for years, maybe since you were a kid. Maybe these things have caused collateral damage in your life, and you are now ready to look at whatever you need to do to make real change. Maybe you have made some changes, but it seems like something else has taken its place. Maybe you've just traded one addiction for another, one problem for another. How does a person break these chains of bondage, and is there hope for permanent change? These are the topics that I want to discuss with our guest today as he shares his life change story with us. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. So, hey, friend, why don't you introduce yourself and let the listeners know who you are?
Hey, Eric, so great to be here today. So thank you so much for reaching out and connecting with me. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with drugs, alcohol, and lust in my life. My name is Scott Kemp. I currently serve as the North Central Regional Director for Celebrate Recovery, ministry, Christ-centered 12-step ministry that was started at Saddleback Church 30-some years ago. And grateful to be here with you today, man.
So, Scott, thank you so much for agreeing to be on my podcast. We know a lot of the same people, and so it's really exciting to have you here, and I'm excited to hear your story. So why don't we start off at every story has a beginning. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you were born, and a little bit about where you were raised with your family of origin.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My folks were both State Farm insurance employees for a lot of years, and my sister and I were both born out in Philadelphia. And then at a young age, I moved back here to actually Normal, Illinois, which is the twin city of Bloomington, Illinois, and that's where it all started. I was raised here.
So, how many years are between you and your sister? Were you guys close growing up, or not?
Yeah, 2 years between us. I think she really looked to me to set examples for her at a young age. She's actually left-handed and sitting across the dinner table from me. I'm right-handed, and I think she learned, to kind of mimic me. So she's a left-hander. But yeah, we were close growing up.
Well, that's good. Were you close to your mom and dad, or not so much?
Yeah, my dad was a tennis player, and growing up, and I learned to play. He taught me how to play. I taught my sister how to play, so I was close to him in that way. Probably closer to my mom emotionally, though. She was the caretaker in the house, and she was a godly woman and taught me a lot about Jesus at a young age. My mom was a devout Catholic, never drank or smoked, and took us to church every week. My dad was Presbyterian, but later converted to Catholicism in his life.
That's great. What was Scott like in school? Were you outgoing? Were you a little shy? Were you confident in yourself, or not so much?
Yeah, I was a little bit rowdy. I think I had, didn't know what it was back then, but I think I had a little case of ADHD in my life, and was pretty active as a young boy. I had a couple surgeries when I was a young boy on my left eye. I had a lazy left eye I was born with, and those surgeries forced me into wearing a little set of glasses with a patch over one eye. So I was picked on pretty regularly in my neighborhood, as well as at school. And it led to me being a little bit shy. I was kind of a scrawny kid, so it led to me being a little bit shy, but actually pretty active, physically.
Did you feel confident in yourself? You know, at Celebrate Recovery, we talk about identity and what we believe about ourselves. Were you confident in yourself, or were you a little insecure? I mean, tell me about what you felt like. Who'd you feel like you were growing up in school?
Yeah, I think I was pretty active, but at the same time, pretty shy. I struggled with self-confidence for quite a while because of the teasing and that came from schoolmates as well as neighborhood kids for the patch I had on one eye, and felt less than in my life. So I think I was shy early on and lacked that confidence I needed as a young boy. And that led to acting out a little bit more, acting out and being loud so I could attract attention, kind of a people pleaser. So that's kind of what it was like when in my early days.
So as you got into adolescence and into high school, you know, sometimes we compensate, and you mentioned, you know, being loud or whatever. Were you more of a rule follower, or were you more of a rebel as you got into high school?
Well, a little bit of both. I think, there's some good structure in my home and order in my home. Um, my mom wasn't a big punisher. That came more from my dad. But mom was, very focused on keeping things in order, kind of a perfectionist. And that led to good order in my home growing up. And then I got into school, things started to change a little bit, and I started becoming a little bit more rebellious, mostly to draw attention to myself. And that led into junior high and introduction to drugs and alcohol at a young age. So that's kind of how things progressed in my younger years.
So as you were in high school, I mean, you mentioned, you know, and I think that's a fairly common thing where we get introduced to some substances that maybe our parents wouldn't approve of or whatever. So would you say that when you were in high school that any of those things became addictive, or that you were dependent on any of those, or was it more just social drinking or social activities where you participated in that, or did it start becoming a bad habit?
Well, I was introduced at a young age to alcohol. My dad let me sip on his drinks and mix drinks and beer at a young age, and that led to a real fascination to drugs. And in junior high, started getting high on marijuana, drinking them a little bit more regularly, and I had a fear of living life on life's terms and having a fear of intimacy around the opposite sex. And I feared not growing up to be the kind of son, the kind of husband and father that my mom and dad wanted me to be. Again, raised in the Catholic Church, and um, mom came from a big Catholic family, and really looked for me to be a good Catholic boy, especially around family and friends. My father had a great job, but he was quite passive. I didn't hear him say "I love you" very often. Usually kept his feelings to himself. And he was a drinker and occasional cigar smoker. And I remember how mad it used to make my mom when I was young.
So, whenever you were in later high school, did you develop a relationship? You said you had a little bit of a shyness about, you know, the opposite sex. Or did you find a girlfriend while you were in high school? Did you have any close relationships there, or not so much?
Yeah, not so much. I obviously was fascinated by the opposite sex, and but I developed a pornography addiction at a young age. I had a neighbor that had a huge porn collection that was displayed in his basement, and my dad would go over there and have drinks and smoke cigars with him, and I would do my viewing, of the collection of pornography, which led to my own collection of pornography when I got into junior high school and high school. Um, one thing I did do is my dad traveled a lot with his job, brought back different types and varieties of beer, and I started collecting the cans and bottles as just something to display and keep. And I ended up having probably one of the larger beer can collections in Central Illinois. So, alcohol became an idol to me pretty early in my life.
So whenever, and I don't know much about the Catholic faith. I grew up in a different faith. So tell me a little bit. Where was there? Because you were exposed to alcohol. Your dad actually allowed you to drink a little bit. You had some of that exposure. Was there ever a realization in your own mind that what you were doing was wrong? What about the pornography? I mean, you mentioned that you witnessed your dad, had his stash and that sort of thing. Did you say, oh, well, he does it, so it's probably okay, and there's nothing wrong with that? Or did you have some kind of morality there that was saying, I really probably shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway? I mean, what was your belief about all of that?
Yeah, pretty much. I knew what I was doing wasn't in line with what God wanted for me, but I didn't have that relationship with Jesus Christ at a young age that I really developed later on in my life. Once I got into high school, I fell away from the church, stopped attending, went through all the normal sacraments and events as a young Catholic, going to First Communion and confirmation and those events. But when I got into high school, things kind of went awry, and I fell away from my friends who were attending Catholic school and attending Catholic church. Yeah, I knew the things I was doing didn't really align with what my parents wanted me to be doing, or what God wanted me to be doing. And that fascination with drugs really picked up when I got into high school, and led to an arrest on school grounds when I was a young man in high school for possession of marijuana. And so that was kind of my deal. I was into the party scene, and everything I did revolved around drinking and drugging.
So were you 18 or older or younger whenever you got in trouble with the law?
I was a senior in high school, and we were getting high or drunk in the mornings before school in the school parking lot. And I got caught there, and did a little bit of time in jail. But after I got out, I realized I needed to be a little safer and smarter about where I was doing drugs or drinking, and so had to change my lifestyle a little bit, and fell away from my high school friends pretty quickly. And when I got out of high school, I jumped into a corporate job and at a large corporate firm in our community, and I fell away from my friends and met some new friends in this corporate world that had better drug connections than I had ever had, and those relationships led to a lot more trouble.
So it doesn't sound like your stint in jail and the trouble that you got with the law really changed anything in your belief system. It more or less just said, hey, I need to be smarter about what I do. It doesn't seem like that was a turning point for you. So it sounded like you continued that on, but you didn't go to college, right? You went right into the workforce?
Yep, that's correct. I didn't go to college, and jumped right into the workforce. Met older friends who had the great drug connections, and actually started selling marijuana and cocaine in my community. And that went on for quite a few years.
Wow. So did you still stay to yourself, or did you get involved with a relationship at all?
Yeah, I met in my senior year. I met a young lady who would become my first wife, and we moved in together after high school, and we both were working and doing a lot of partying. We had an incident that happened in early years of our relationship. She got pregnant and with twin babies, and we lost those twins at 5 months. Um, Drastic event, and probably affected her more than it did me. She stopped using pretty much altogether, and I kept going down my merry way. And God was watching, though. A year later, she got pregnant again and had our first child on Mother's Day in 1983.
So what we talk a lot about character defects. We talk about baggage that we bring into our marriage. A lot of times it's from our past. It sounds to me like your first wife and you had some common ground in the drugs and the party scene, but it sounds like that she had a little bit of a change of heart after losing the babies. Did you guys grow apart after that? Tell me a little bit about what was going on in your dynamic through all of these things.
Yeah, great question. She wasn't raised in church, and we got along real well. She loved the party scene. I kind of introduced her to that, and we did our thing for quite a few years. After losing the babies, her mindset changed a little bit. It wasn't about finding Jesus, but she knew that if we wanted to have kids, that she needed to stay away from the drinking and the drugging. And it's our relationship changed a little bit where there were a lot of drunken arguments, physical and verbal abuse, and we ended up having two more children several years later. And we tried to live the life of a couple that had it all together, and had three great kids and all that. So it was a little bit of a little bit of a more of a poser type. I looked like I had it all together on the outside, but I was actually dying on the inside. Lived in a nice home. I was making good money at my job, and she worked part-time and stayed home most of the time and taking care of the kids, which was a great benefit for them as they grew up. She was a good mom, and just I never got arrested for drunk driving or being under the influence with the law after that first stint in jail. We bought new homes, drove nice cars, went on great vacations, and really just tried to preserve the image of a good family man with a wife and three children.
So, did you implement Catholicism into your family? Did you continue down the way you grew up, or did that happen? Did you introduce God to your children, or not so much?
Yeah, we did in the Catholic faith, and I went to church a few times a year to make an appearance and try to introduce my kids to really a religion I wasn't interested in. And like I said, it was just to make an appearance and make it look like we were doing all the right things. But yeah, we raised all three children in the Catholic Church, went through first communions and so on. And then as we fell away from the church, of course, they did too.
So so I'm assuming, and I don't want to assume, tell me, how long were you guys married and what led to the divorce, or what were the events? What was the problem? When did things start falling apart during that first marriage?
Yeah, it was really after our third child. My son was born in '89, and the next few years, keeping up that image and approval, um, fell into financial crisis. Bills were piling up. I was into doing some gambling on the side, and a lot of lying and even infidelity in my marriage. I struggled with lustful pornography addiction and actually manipulated my spouse into watching pornography with me just to spice up our dwindling sex life. A lot of unsuccessful sobriety attempts, became a little more regular and tried staying clean and sober, but it never lasted more than a few weeks. And still getting high and drinking before, during, and after work. So it's got pretty ugly for a few years before things went south.
So what was the straw that broke the camel's back?
Well, I knew I had big problems, but I wasn't ready to admit it to anyone. I was physically, emotionally, and financially spent. My coworkers were starting to begin to notice my behavior and absences at work, and my marriage was falling apart. I was close to losing my job without a college education. I knew I couldn't lose this job. And, I really started getting sick and tired of being sick and tired, and started often, thinking about taking my life. I would get out of my car in the morning to go to work in the garage and sit there and just wonder, hungover and wondering, what's going on? What something needs to change.
Did your kids notice? Now, because your oldest kid had to be what, 5 to 8 years old or something like that. Did they notice that anything? And of course, I know sometimes during that time period you don't realize that your kids knows. But have you had conversations with them before? Did they know anything that was going on?
Oh yeah, they knew what was going on. They saw the fighting, they saw the anger, they saw the verbal and physical abuse at times. And that carried over into them as well. I think I was rough with my kids a few times when they were younger, and kind of getting in the way, right, of what I was all about, and that was the drinking and the drugging. And I was a pretty faithful worker. I feel like I had a great work ethic, and tried to be punctual at work all the time, and keep things looking like everything was okay, right? But my mom had taught me about Jesus when I was young, and one morning in the garage, I was sitting there in my car, and I really believe that God was speaking to me that morning and said something needs to change in your life, young man. And my father-in-law, my wife's father, was chronic alcoholic, and he had spent some time in treatment centers. And she suggested that maybe I do that and check into a local treatment center. And really didn't want to have anything to do with that, but I agreed to go check in, and I actually spent about 24 hours there detoxing, and talking to a man who convinced me to stay. And so I spent 2 or 3 weeks in treatment center. I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, and finally found true sobriety in my life.
So when was that in your time period? Was that when you were married to your first wife and you had all your kids? Is that when you were in the garage and you had that moment?
Yeah, it was day after Christmas, 1993. I'll never forget it. And that's the time I took my last drink and my last drug. And just recently celebrated 30 years of recovery from drug and alcohol abuse. So, grateful to God that He spoke to me that morning. While I was in treatment, it was right across the street. The treatment center was right across the street from the church that I went to and grew up in as a child. And I'd look out the windows and see the priest standing on the steps and greeting everybody. And I wondered if I just wondered if Jesus Christ was the real answer to my issues. So I carried that for a little while. I looked out those windows from the treatment center. When I got back out, my job was spared. I had a great boss who spared my job, and went back to work and started attending Alcoholics Anonymous on a regular basis. Found a sponsor, someone who I had actually drank with before, and we formed a great relationship. And him and his wife were really instrumental in helping my wife and me to see the light.
So I'm curious, so you were still married whenever you went into treatment, and it sounds to me like you came out a changed man. It sounds like all of a sudden, God was in your life and you had a relationship with Christ. So what led to your divorce? I mean, you got divorced, right? Am I making that assumption?
No, you're absolutely right. So, I got out of treatment, went to 90 meetings in 90 days. And after about a year of sobriety, my sponsor suggested I attend a men's spiritual retreat. It's called a Cursillo, which is a short course in Christianity. And it was that weekend, about a year after I got sober, that I turned my life over to Jesus Christ. And it was an incredible weekend for me, and gave my heart to Him. And I really wanted to salvage my marriage. The words that I heard in that weekend retreat were really inspirational to me, and touched me pretty deeply. That gratitude was humbling, and I knew at that moment my faith was real, and I earnestly believed that God existed. I didn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. I knew who God was. I believed in a God, but didn't have that relationship with Jesus Christ. And that weekend was powerful for me. Getting out of that weekend, then went back into trying to salvage my marriage, going to AA meetings on a regular basis. And there was some spiritual insight for my wife as well, and but she didn't grow like I did, and things slowly started to disintegrate in our marriage. We weren't having all the drunken arguments and things like that going on, but we just kind of started going separate ways, and it got to a point where we were experiencing some infidelity on her part, and it just came to a close in the late 90s. So I've been sober for about 6 or 7 years before we split.
So did your wife agree with your sobriety? And I don't mean for you. Did she say, Well, it looks like Scott's life is changing. Did she ever take a look at her own sobriety and her own thing, or was hers not really as bad as yours was?
Yeah, I don't think hers was as bad as I was, and she did. After we had the loss of our twins, she slowed down on the drinking and drugging, and eventually it just fell away from her life. But coming out of that weekend and working my own program, I recognized that I was powerless over the lives of others and those around me. My newfound spirituality, I feel it was difficult for her to adjust to, difficult for my kids to adjust to. And as much as I wanted to salvage my marriage, the damage was really done. But we spent some years in counsel and in prayer, and I had a lot of hope. I really wanted to salvage the marriage, but again, just powerless over her choices. And she decided to move out, and our 19-year marriage ended.
So 19 years, that's a long time.
Yep.
And you guys split. Did you and her get custody? Which one got custody of the kids? Did she get custody? Did you get custody? Did you split the difference? I mean, how'd that work for your kids?
Yeah, it was joint custody, and I was the primary custodian of the kids, and so they were had one in high school, one in junior high, and one in grade school. And we had visiting rights. We did it the right way, and really tried to take care of the kids in the whole situation and make sure that they were attended to the right way. So yeah, it was difficult. It was and it was a couple difficult years after we split, trying to manage the kids and help them understand what's going on in their lives and what their mom and dad were doing.
So tell me what happened after you got through the divorce and you got, you guys have joint custody of the kids. Things seem to be going right for you. You're still sober. So what happened next in your life? You're wearing a Celebrate Recovery hat, and you mentioned that several times. What led into that?
Well, I was a single father, trying to raise three kids and wondering if I'd ever be in a healthy, loving relationship ever again in my life. And God, I just prayed that God would reveal something to me, and I prayed for my ex, that she would find healing and find herself in her life. Prayed for my kids, obviously, but I prayed that God would reveal something to me, and He did. I met a young lady who was divorced at my place of work. She was working for a woman who was a childhood neighbor of mine and knew me and my family. And she introduced us in a little matchmaking scheme, which neither one of us really liked so much. But she was a divorcee with a couple young kids, and she sang in the choir at her church, and she had a relationship with Christ that I deeply admired. And I began to court her, and we kept the relationship pure. I'd struggled with pornography most of my life, and I knew that I needed to keep this relationship pure in my recovery. We kept that, we did it the right way. But it was difficult for me, considering the sexual dysfunction I struggled with in my previous marriage, and still dabbling in pornography a little bit. But God knew, and He approved of our relationship. And I think, we courted for over a year, and then we were married in the backyard of a little home that we had purchased, and moved all our kids in together. So she had a couple young kids that were younger than my kids, and we all moved in together. That was an interesting time. We had a big old Victorian home that we all moved into, and so the kids had their privacy to some degree, had their own rooms. But there was a lot of dysfunction in my previous marriage and in hers as well. And our former spouses, and trying to raise a blended family, we struggled. We struggled. And meanwhile, I was secretly dabbling in pornography, and she didn't know that. And I'm so grateful that God had the power to help me recover that part of my life. I began attending her church and became a member, Charismatic Church, Assemblies of God Church, totally different dynamic than what I experienced in the Catholic Church. But a couple years into our marriage, attending that church, the associate pastor asked if I had heard, he knew of my recovery background, asked if I had ever heard of a program called Celebrate Recovery. And I said, no. And he handed me the startup kit. So I immediately was curious. You know, I was already involved in prison ministry and Bible studies in our home with my new spouse. Um, but God kept leading me to check out this ministry, and I went to my first Celebrate Recovery meeting in a community not too far from Bloomington Normal, and I knew as soon as I walked in, I felt at home. You know, when I attended my first men's open share group at Celebrate Recovery, the leader introduced himself as a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with drugs, alcohol, and lust, you know, just like me. And I felt home, I really felt at home. So, you know, the rest of the men introduced themselves at that first meeting, and I realized that, you know, their identity was in Jesus Christ first, not in, you know, the hurt, hang up, or habit that they struggled with. And that meant a lot to me. And, you know, I'd been introducing myself as an alcoholic and addict for many years in Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and even some time in the Al Anon program for the families of alcoholics. But now I was introducing myself as a believer in Jesus Christ, the one and only true higher power, Jesus Christ. And I knew this ministry was right for me, and I wanted to introduce it to my church.
So would you say you either traded addictions a little bit or that you leaned more into the pornography after you were free from the drugs and alcohol?
Yeah, certainly. I think I leaned into that more. That was my secret. You know, eventually I revealed it to my wife. Um, huh, Funny how it all took place, but I realized when I started working a Celebrate Recovery program that I needed to admit this. You know, James 5:16 is a huge verse for me. It's not a life verse, but it's right up there. And I think when we admit our sins to each other and pray for each other, it's amazing how God uses us. So I'd learned how to admit my sins, not so much my use of alcohol and drugs and the life that I was sharing in Alcoholics Anonymous, but in Celebrate Recovery, I recognized the sin. And when I admitted that, I immediately found some healing. I was admitting it in the small groups to the other men, but I wasn't admitting it to my wife. And when I did, my life started to change. And I actually got baptized at this new church. This, you know, submersion underwater and coming out a new man. You know, I admitted in front of the congregation that I'd struggled with pornography and acting out with lust and masturbation, and that was huge for me. Admitting that and getting baptized over that to make that change, that 180-degree change of not looking at pornography anymore and acting out on it, was huge for me, and that was the end of it for me. That was in 2005, I think, after several years of marriage and new marriage, and the rest is history. But you know, I still struggle with lust today. And it's not just for, you know, looking at other women or objectifying women and you know, looking at women the wrong way. I have to remember that Christ brought a beautiful woman into my life that I need to keep my focus on today. But I still struggle with lust at times over other things too, besides, you know, my sexual intimacy or my sexual identity. But lusting over things, you know, material things, lusting over power, pride, all those things. But God knows, and He helps me on a daily basis to take care of that. You know, it's all about repenting every day. You know, repenting every day to the Lord for what I'm doing, what I've said, or what I'm thinking that doesn't align up with His Word. Is so important for me today.
Was there any other verses that really stuck out to you that was an inspiration for you?
Yeah, you know, I love the book of Hebrews. Chapter 11, verse 6 talks about anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those that earnestly seek Him. You know, I have to seek Him every day, whether staying in the Word or doing podcasts and sharing my story or sharing my story at Celebrate Recovery groups. We have a couples testimony that we do around the region. And in fact, we're going to be up in Chicago this weekend giving our couples testimony at a Celebrate Recovery that's celebrating 20 years of CR. So, you know, those are the things that I need to do on a regular basis. And He rewards us. His grace is incredible as we stay more connected to Him and living for Him.
So, Scott, you have experienced life change. And sometimes the perception is that after life change, everything is cake and cookies with no problems ever again. Has that been your experience, or does life throw you a curveball every now and then?
So, I think one of the things that my wife and I both realized today, her name is Veronica, by the way. Veronica and I have had some tough losses here in the last year and a half. I had lost both my parents years ago. My father passed of Parkinson's disease in 2009. My mom had a stroke in 2003. She's been gone a long time and passed. But, death, Jesus conquered death. And today, when we have losses in our lives, we have found that we're managing those better than we ever have because we have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Veronica lost a sister about a year and a half ago to undiagnosed lung disease. I lost my sponsor, my Celebrate Recovery sponsor, last year on Christmas Day. That's 2022, and we've both struggled with grief over the last year and a half. And grief is a funny thing, and I never experienced it like when I lost my parents. But when we lose those people that are really close to, that know everything about us, my mom and dad didn't know everything about me. I wasn't honest with them about everything going on in my head and my activities. But when you lose people that are really close to you, that really know you for who you are, not what you are, that's tough. And we've both had a season of grief that we're working through together, talking to each other about it, expressing our feelings to each other about it. And I just want people to know out there that grief can be handled a whole lot differently when we know Jesus today. And I'm grateful for that. It's really helped us both through this time.
So I've got one question that I want you to answer. What would that one message be to the person that realizes they're going the wrong direction in their life? What would that message be that you would say, hey, this is my recommendation to you?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm all about self-care today. The Lord gives us a couple great commandments, right? To love the Lord with all our heart, all our mind, all our soul. But then to love others like we love ourselves. I always struggled with that scripture in Matthew. But I think today, if I know that if I don't take care of myself, if I'm not right in my life right here, first and foremost, I'm no good to anybody else. And and it may sound a little bit selfish, but recovery's that way. If I don't take care of me the best way I can to live my life for my Lord Jesus Christ, I'm no good to my wife. I'm no good to my kids. I can't set the example that I need to set for others in my life and potentially lead them to Jesus Christ. So I think it's about taking care of me first and foremost, so that I can bring the best Scott Kemp to my ministry, my church, my family, my wife, my kids, to set the best example I can.
Scott, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you've been struggling with issues in your life, have these issues been with you a long time? Maybe since you were a kid. Maybe these issues are a hurt in your life, a bad habit, or maybe just some character defects that you need a higher power to change. Maybe you've never taken the time to focus on these issues in your life so that you can experience true life change. As Scott said, self-care is so important. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." Are you ready for a course change in your life? Change is possible, but if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.